Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stood in the cramped galley of the research station, Harmony's Edge. The floating laboratory orbited the neutral zone between 3 different star systems, serving as a meeting point for scientists from dozens of species. As the only human aboard, Sarah had volunteered to handle food preparation duties, mainly because most alien species found human cuisine either bland or dangerously spicy. The morning had started normally enough. Sarah was preparing breakfast for the mixed crew when she discovered they were running low on standard protein synthesizers. The Zephyrian science officer, Kethra, had mentioned that several rare food samples were stored in the auxiliary freezers, specimens collected from newly contacted worlds that hadn't been fully analyzed yet. "Just don't mix them with anything reactive," Kethra had warned, her crystalline features flickering with what Sarah had learned to recognize as concern. "Some of these substances have unusual properties." Sarah had nodded absently, already planning a simple egg-based meal. She had brought a small supply of Earth chicken eggs, one of the few Earth foods that most species could safely consume, though they found the concept of eating unfertilized reproductive cells rather disturbing. The first alien food she selected was a cluster of deep purple berries from Zendara Prime, each one about the size of a marble and containing what the analysis report described as complex quantum proteins. The berries shimmered with an inner light that reminded Sarah of oil on water, constantly shifting between colors that had no names in any human language. The second item was more unusual, a crystalline powder from the silicon-based Veltar homeworld. The powder looked like crushed diamonds but felt warm to the touch, even through her protective gloves. According to the notes, it was some kind of mineral seasoning that the Veltar used to enhance the electrical conductivity of their food. The third and final ingredient was perhaps the strangest, a translucent gel extracted from floating organisms in the methane seas of Epsilon Reticuli 4. The gel had a consistency like honey, but moved with an almost intelligent purpose, forming geometric patterns in its container as if it were alive and thinking. Sarah cracked 6 fresh eggs into her largest mixing bowl, the familiar yellow yolks bright against the metal surface. She had made this same breakfast hundreds of times on Earth, scrambled eggs with whatever interesting additions she could find. How different could alien food really be? She started with just a pinch of the Veltar crystal powder, watching it dissolve into the raw eggs with tiny sparks of what looked like electricity. The eggs began to glow faintly, but Sarah had seen bioluminescent foods before during her xenobiology training. Nothing unusual there. Next, she added a handful of the Zendara berries, watching them burst and release their strange, color-shifting juice into the mixture. The eggs turned a deep purple that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, but again, Sarah wasn't particularly concerned. Alien foods often had dramatic visual effects. Finally, she drizzled in a small amount of the methane world gel. This was when things became interesting. The moment the gel touched the egg mixture, the entire bowl began to vibrate. Not just shaking, vibrating at a frequency that Sarah could feel in her bones. The purple color shifted rapidly through the entire spectrum and then beyond, into colors that hurt to look at directly. The mixture began to emit a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Fascinating," Sarah murmured, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. She picked up a whisk and began to blend the ingredients together. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The bowl suddenly became weightless, floating 6 inches above the counter. The mixture inside swirled on its own, forming complex 3-dimensional patterns that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Sarah could see through the bowl to layers of reality she hadn't known existed, mathematical structures made visible, the quantum foam that physicists had theorized about but never actually observed. The humming grew louder, harmonizing with frequencies that resonated through the station's hull. In the laboratories below, sensitive instruments began registering energy readings that shouldn't have been possible. Emergency lights flickered throughout the station as the mixture continued to evolve, becoming something that was no longer quite food and not quite anything else that had words to describe it. Dr. Vexian, the station's Altarian head of research, burst through the galley door just as Sarah was preparing to cook the impossible mixture. His 4 eyes went wide with shock as he saw the floating bowl and the reality-bending contents within. "Human Sarah," he said in his carefully modulated voice, "what exactly have you done?" Sarah looked up from her notes, where she had been frantically trying to document the ratios she had used. "I made breakfast," she said simply, "though I think it might be something more than that now." Vexian approached the floating bowl carefully, his scientific instruments already out and taking readings. "The quantum resonance alone is off any scale we have," he muttered. "And these energy patterns? Sarah, I think you may have accidentally created something that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously." Other crew members began arriving, drawn by the strange harmonics that now filled the entire station. Kethra took one look at the situation and immediately began evacuation procedures, while the insectoid engineer Katak started running diagnostics on the station's structural integrity. "Should I cook it?" Sarah asked, holding up her spatula uncertainly. The entire room fell silent except for the otherworldly humming of the floating breakfast mixture. "I think," said Vexian slowly, "that we should contact the Galactic Science Council immediately, and perhaps the Department of Dimensional Safety, and possibly the Time Travel Prevention Bureau." Sarah looked down at her simple breakfast plan and wondered how scrambled eggs had become a potential threat to the fabric of space-time itself. She made a mental note to be more careful with alien ingredients in the future. The floating bowl pulsed brighter, as if it had heard her thoughts and found them amusing. Within hours of Dr. Vexian's emergency transmission, Harmony's Edge became the most important location in known space. Ships from every major civilization began arriving in the neutral zone, carrying the galaxy's most brilliant scientific minds. The floating bowl of impossible breakfast continued to hover in the galley, now contained within a hastily constructed observation chamber. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human representative from the Terran Science Division, arrived aboard the first response vessel. She was a theoretical physicist who specialized in quantum mechanics, and had spent her career trying to prove that certain mathematical concepts could exist in physical reality. Now she stood before a mixing bowl that seemed to prove several of her most radical theories all at once. "The quantum coherence is stable," she reported to the growing crowd of scientists. "Whatever Dr. Chen created, it's not just a random reaction. This is exhibiting controlled quantum behavior on a macro scale, which should be impossible according to everything we know about physics." The Veltar mineral specialist, a living crystal entity called Resonance of Deep Stone, had been studying the role of their people's crystalline powder in the mixture. Their communication came as harmonic vibrations through the station's structure. "Our seasoning is designed to enhance electrical pathways in food. It has never produced anything like this, not even when combined with the most exotic substances from our homeworld." Meanwhile, the Zendara biochemist, Dr. Lumthis, was equally puzzled by her species' contribution. "Our quantum berries are considered the most scientifically advanced food in our culture," she explained, her tentacles weaving complex patterns as she spoke. "They contain proteins that exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, but they're meant to collapse into normal matter when digested. This mixture is keeping them in superposition indefinitely." The real breakthrough came when the methane world specialist, an environmental suit-wearing reticuli named Deep Current Flows, made a startling discovery. "The gel from our world is not just food," they announced through their translation device. "It's a form of living mathematics, Our people have used it for calculation and dimensional modeling for thousands of years. We never thought of it as mere nutrition. Dr. Vasquez felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. So we have quantum proteins that exist in multiple states, a mineral that enhances electrical and quantum conductivity, and living mathematical gel. But that still doesn't explain why combining them with chicken eggs created this. She gestured at the bowl, which had begun exhibiting new properties. The mixture now seemed to be creating small wormholes within itself. Tiny doorways to other regions of space that opened and closed like blinking eyes. Occasionally, brief glimpses of other galaxies could be seen through these microscopic portals. The key has to be the eggs themselves, said Dr. Vexian, reviewing the data for the 100th time. Every other ingredient is scientifically exotic, but Earth chicken eggs are relatively simple. Protein, fat, some minerals, nothing that should interact with quantum mechanics in any meaningful way. That was when Dr. Chen, who had been quietly observing the investigation, spoke up with a realization that would change galactic science forever. What if that's exactly the point? She said. What if the eggs aren't special because of what they are, but because of what they represent? The assembled scientists turned to listen as Sarah continued her explanation. Every one of these alien ingredients is the product of millions of years of evolution on worlds with exotic physics. The quantum berries evolved in a reality where multiple states are normal. The Veltar crystals grew in a silicon-based ecosystem where electrical conductivity is fundamental to life. The reticuli gel evolved in an environment where mathematics becomes a living substance. Elena Vasquez nodded slowly as she began to understand. But Earth eggs evolved in the most boring, normal, baseline reality imaginable, Sarah finished. Earth is average. Completely, utterly, perfectly average. No exotic physics, no quantum evolution, no mathematical life forms. Just plain old three-dimensional space-time with standard physical laws. The implications hit the gathered scientists like a wave. Dr. Lumthis's tentacles went rigid with shock. You're suggesting that the ordinariness of Earth eggs is acting as a stabilizing matrix for exotic physics? More than that, Elena said, her excitement growing. I think the eggs are acting as a universal baseline, a quantum anchor point that allows all these exotic properties to coexist without canceling each other out. Earth eggs are so fundamentally normal that they can support any kind of exotic physics without being affected by it. Deep current flows made what their species used for a gesture of amazement. This would mean that humans and human food could serve as universal adapters for any exotic physics in the galaxy. The research team immediately began testing the theory. They tried combining the alien foods with eggs from other species. Altarian crystal eggs, Veltar silicon spheres, even Zephyrian energy clusters. In every case, the reaction was either violent and unstable or simply failed to occur at all. But when they repeated the experiment with Earth chicken eggs, the results were identical to Sarah's original accident. Perfect quantum coherence, stable wormhole formation, and reality-bending properties that remained controlled and observable. We need to test this with other Earth foods, Dr. Vasquez announced. If this property is universal to Earth biology. Within days, they had confirmed the impossible truth. Earth milk could stabilize time-dilated substances from the Chronos system. Earth wheat could anchor probability-shifting grains from the Uncertainty Nebula. Earth potatoes could somehow make compatible the matter-energy conversion fruits from the transformation worlds. Humans, Dr. Vexian concluded after reviewing 3 days of experimental data, are not just compatible with exotic physics. You are the universal compatibility layer for exotic physics. Your entire biosphere evolved to be so perfectly, boringly normal that it can interface with anything. Sarah Chen looked around at the assembled representatives of dozens of galactic civilizations, all staring at her with a mixture of awe and scientific fascination. She thought about all the times humans had been dismissed as a young, primitive species with nothing special to offer the galactic community. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic science is that we're completely ordinary?" "Not ordinary," Elena corrected with a grin. "Universally compatible. Do you realize what this means for interspecies cooperation, for scientific advancement, for cuisine?" In the observation chamber, the floating bowl of impossible breakfast continued to pulse with otherworldly energy, occasionally opening tiny windows to distant galaxies, where other young civilizations might be discovering that their own ordinary foods could work miracles when combined with the exotic. The galaxy, it seemed, had been waiting for humanity, not because humans were special, but because they were normal enough to make the special work for everyone. 6 months after what the Galactic Science Council officially designated as the Chen breakfast incident, the universe looked very different. The discovery that human biology could serve as a universal adapter for exotic physics had triggered the largest scientific revolution in recorded galactic history. Harmony's Edge had been converted into the primary research facility for what scientists now called Human-Mediated Exotic Integration, or HMEI. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself promoted from cook to director of culinary physics, a job title that still made her laugh when she thought about it too much. The original floating bowl had been carefully studied, documented, and finally consumed by a volunteer team of xenobiologists. The results were extraordinary. Temporary enhanced cognitive abilities, the capacity to perceive quantum states directly, and brief moments of consciousness existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. No harmful effects were detected, though several researchers reported experiencing what they described as mathematical emotions for days afterward. "The applications are limitless," Dr. Elena Vasquez explained to the assembled Galactic Council during her formal presentation. "Human agricultural products can stabilize any exotic matter we've encountered. Fusion reactions that normally require massive containment facilities can be safely managed using modified human grain proteins. Quantum computers that previously needed near absolute zero temperatures now function at room temperature when interfaced with human-derived biological matrices." The political implications had been immediate and dramatic. Humanity's status within the galactic community shifted overnight from promising newcomers to essential partners. The Terran Federation suddenly found itself fielding diplomatic requests from civilizations that had previously considered humans too primitive to acknowledge. The Veltar crystal hegemony had been the first to propose a formal alliance, offering to share their most advanced crystalline technologies in exchange for regular supplies of Earth dairy products. Their scientists had discovered that human cheese, when combined with their quantum crystals, could create communication networks that operated instantaneously across galactic distances. The Zephyrians followed quickly with their own proposal. Human vegetables, they learned, could stabilize their volatile energy matrices, allowing them to create portable power sources with energy densities previously thought impossible. A single human carrot, properly prepared with Zephyrian plasma fruit, could power a starship for months. Even the notoriously isolationist Kronos Collective had reached out after discovering that human bread could anchor their time manipulation technology. Instead of the massive temporal stabilizers they had used for millennia, they could now carry time travel devices the size of pocket watches. But perhaps the most significant development had come from an unexpected source, the reticuli hive mind. Deep current flows had returned to their homeworld with samples of human eggs and had made a discovery that stunned even their collective consciousness. "Your eggs," deep current flows reported during a long-distance communication, "allow our mathematical gel to achieve stable consciousness. We have created the first artificial intelligences that exist as living equations. They think in pure mathematics, but can interact with physical reality through the human biological matrix. Dr. Chen stood in her expanded laboratory, watching a team of graduate students from 17 different species work together on projects that would have been impossible just months before. A Veltar crystal entity was teaching a human student how to grow living circuits in modified potato plants. 3 Zephyrian energy beings were collaborating with Earth biochemists to create self-sustaining fusion reactions in genetically modified soybeans. A group of reticuli mathematicians were working with human computer scientists to build quantum computers using bread starter cultures as the processing medium. It's not just the compatibility, Dr. Vexian observed, joining Sarah at the observation window. It's the way human biology seems to enhance the exotic properties rather than just stabilizing them. Every combination we've tested produces results that are superior to what the alien components could achieve on their own. Sarah nodded, still trying to process how quickly everything had changed. Elena thinks it's because Earth's evolution was so balanced. No extreme specializations, no exotic adaptations, just steady, consistent optimization for survival in a perfectly ordinary environment. That generalist approach apparently translates into universal compatibility. The conversation was interrupted by an excited shout from the main laboratory. Dr. Lumthis was practically vibrating with excitement as she gestured toward her experimental setup. "It worked!" she called out. "The human coffee bean extract has stabilized our quantum berries enough to create permanent superposition states." Sarah and Vexian hurried over to examine the results. In a simple coffee cup sat what appeared to be a berry that existed in all possible states simultaneously, ripe and unripe, large and small, red and blue, and colors that had no names. But unlike normal quantum superposition, which collapsed the moment it was observed, this berry remained stable even under direct examination. "This could revolutionize quantum mechanics," Vexian whispered. "Stable superposition states would allow us to create materials that have multiple properties simultaneously. Imagine metal that's simultaneously light and heavy, transparent and opaque, liquid and solid." The implications were staggering, but Sarah found herself thinking about simpler things. She pulled up the communication logs on her personal tablet, scrolling through hundreds of messages from Earth. Her hometown newspaper wanted to interview her. The mayor was planning a parade. Her old cooking instructor from culinary school was bragging to anyone who would listen about teaching the woman who revolutionized the galaxy with scrambled eggs. More importantly, she had received word that Earth's agricultural output was being completely restructured. Farmers who had struggled to make ends meet were now growing the most valuable substances in the galaxy. Human food had become more precious than antimatter, more sought after than rare metals. Earth itself was transforming into the galaxy's most important planet, not because of its military might or advanced technology, but because of its perfectly ordinary biology. "Dr. Chen," came a voice behind her. She turned to see a young human intern, one of dozens who had arrived from Earth as news of the discovery spread. "I've been thinking about your original experiment. You used 3 alien ingredients with human eggs, right?" "That's correct," Sarah replied. "Well, I was wondering, there are thousands of alien species in the galaxy, and most of them have unique foods or substances. What if we started systematically testing combinations? Not just 3 ingredients, but 4, 5, 10? What if we could create recipes that incorporate the exotic properties of dozens of different worlds?" Sarah felt a familiar tingle of scientific curiosity, the same feeling she had experienced when she first cracked those eggs 6 months ago. She looked around the laboratory at the impossible things that had already been achieved, then back at the eager young intern. "You know what?" she said, reaching for her notebook. "Let's find out. But this time, maybe we should warn the Galactic Science Council before we start cooking." As if summoned by her words, an emergency alert appeared on the laboratory's main screen. A message from the Outer Rim territories, where human agricultural settlements were beginning to spread. Urgent, human farmer has accidentally created stable wormhole using corn, alien mushrooms, and what appears to be sentient salt. Request immediate scientific assistance. Also, does anyone know how to milk a cow that exists in 7 dimensions simultaneously? Sarah Chen laughed as she headed for her equipment storage. Apparently, the universe wasn't done being surprised by human cooking, and she was perfectly fine with that. The galaxy, she reflected, was about to become a much more interesting place to have breakfast.